The galaxy had been torn apart by a long and bitter war. On one side, there were the Xychros, a ruthless alien race known for their terrifying power and overwhelming fleets. On the other side, the Arctans, a proud people who had been pushed to the brink of extinction. Their forces had been decimated, their homeworlds lost, and yet they fought on, determined to survive. The war had seemed endless, with no real hope for either side. But everything changed when a human warship appeared out of nowhere, breaking through the chaos of the battlefield. No one had seen it coming. At first, the Xychros thought it was just another ship, an insignificant blip on their radar. They had faced so many enemies before, and this human vessel seemed like a tiny threat compared to the vast fleets of the Xychros. However, when they fired their first shots, the Xychros were stunned. The human warship didn't just absorb the attack. It countered with precision that left the Xychros stunned. Their weapons seemed ineffective, and within minutes, the human ship had taken down one of their massive warships, sending debris scattered across the stars. The Arctans, who had been watching from the sidelines, were equally shocked. They had no idea who these humans were or where they had come from, but they couldn't deny the power of the ship that now stood in the middle of the battlefield. The Xychros, seeing the damage done, quickly tried to organize an all-out assault on the human warship, but it was like watching a cat try to catch a bird. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the human ship outmaneuvered them, unleashing deadly bursts of energy that tore through their defenses. It was as though the human warship knew every move the Xychros would make before they made it. As the battle raged on, both sides found themselves caught in a strange new dynamic. The Arctans, with their backs against the wall, saw a glimmer of hope. They had no idea what the humans wanted or why they had shown up, but they knew that this warship could change everything. The Arctan commander, feeling a rare spark of hope, tried to reach out to the human ship, hoping for an alliance. The human ship responded, but not in the way they expected. There were no formal negotiations, no long speeches, just the presence of the warship itself, silently declaring that it was a force to be reckoned with. The Xychros, on the other hand, were furious. They had never encountered anything like this before, and it filled them with an unsettling fear. They had always believed that their sheer numbers and firepower were unbeatable, but the human ship had shattered that illusion. Desperate to maintain their dominance, the Xychros launched wave after wave of attacks, but the human warship turned every single one aside, using tactics that the Xychros could never have predicted. The Xychros could not understand how a single ship, without reinforcements, could be so powerful. In the midst of this chaos, something extraordinary began to happen. The Xychros started to falter. Their confidence, which had once been their greatest strength, began to waver. They had never been outsmarted before, never faced an enemy who could turn the tide of battle so swiftly. They tried to regroup, but it was too late. The human warship moved like a shadow, picking off their ships one by one, rendering their enormous fleets powerless. It wasn't just the firepower, it was the tactics, the intelligence behind the movements, the fact that this human warship seemed to know exactly how to exploit every weakness in their defenses. The Arctans, watching from their own ships, could hardly believe what they were seeing. They had been fighting for so long, believing that their people were doomed. Now, with the arrival of the human warship, it was as if the entire war had shifted. The Xychros, despite their overwhelming strength, were being systematically dismantled, and the Arctans could only watch as their enemy crumbled under the power of this mysterious human ship. The tension was palpable. The humans were not talking, not negotiating, they were simply fighting, changing the course of the war without uttering a single word. The Xychros, feeling the weight of defeat pressing down on them, began to panic. What had they underestimated? What made this human warship so dangerous? And perhaps the most terrifying thought of all, what did the humans want? They had come from nowhere, destroyed a fleet, and were now dismantling another. Were they conquerors, allies, or something else entirely? As the final hours of the battle approached, the Xychros, their morale shattered, made one last desperate attempt to destroy the human warship. But it was no use. With each passing moment, the human warship moved with the grace of a predator, cutting down their forces without mercy. It was not about victory anymore, it was about survival. The Xychros had underestimated the humans, And now, the price of that mistake was becoming clear. By the time the battle ended, the human warship had proven itself to be something far beyond anyone's expectations. The Zycros, once so sure of their dominance, had been crushed. The Arctans, who had been on the verge of annihilation, were now standing tall, no longer in fear. The humans had shown that they were not just another race in the galaxy, they were a force to be reckoned with. And as the human warship turned and left the battlefield, the question remained, why had they come? What did they want? The war was far from over, but everything had changed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The war had raged on for what felt like an eternity. The Draktar, an unstoppable force of genetically engineered warriors, had marched across the galaxy with one goal: total domination. For years, they had crushed all who dared to stand in their way, their advanced weaponry and ruthless tactics leaving entire civilizations in ruins. The Elysians, once proud and powerful, had been pushed to the edge of extinction. Their homeworld had fallen, and their fleets were nearly destroyed. The few remaining survivors were scattered across the galaxy, barely hanging on by a thread. It seemed like the end for them. But then, everything changed. The unexpected happened. A human warship appeared out of nowhere, a single vessel that was about to alter the course of the war forever. First, no one knew where it had come from. The Draktar had received no reports of an incoming fleet, and the Elysians had never heard of such a ship. The human warship was not like anything either side had ever seen before. It was sleek, dark, and strangely silent as it moved through space, appearing like a shadow amidst the chaos of the ongoing battle. The Draktar commanders, accustomed to controlling everything in their path, dismissed the human ship as nothing more than a passing anomaly. They were wrong. The Draktar launched a powerful assault on the remnants of the Elysians. The human warship suddenly engaged. It didn't announce itself with a flashy display of power, it simply attacked. In one swift move, the human warship launched a barrage of energy blasts that tore through the Draktar fleet. The Draktar, stunned by the precision and power of the attack, quickly retaliated. But every missile they launched was either intercepted or dodged. The human warship was faster than anything they had ever encountered, and it struck with deadly accuracy. The Draktar didn't understand what was happening. They had never faced an enemy like this before. The Elysians, seeing this new arrival on the battlefield, didn't know whether to celebrate or be cautious. They had no idea who these humans were or what their intentions were. But one thing was clear: the human warship had just shifted the balance of the war. The Draktar, who had once seemed invincible, were now struggling. The Elysians, desperate for any hope, realized that this human ship might be their last chance to survive. They sent a signal to the human warship, hoping for some kind of alliance. But there was no response. The human ship didn't speak. It didn't need to. It simply continued its assault, dismantling the Draktar ships one by one. As the battle continued, the Draktar began to panic. Their tactics, which had always been their strength, weren't working. The human warship moved like a predator in the shadows, striking when it was least expected and always staying one step ahead. The Draktar leaders gathered in their command ships, trying to figure out what to do. They had never experienced this kind of warfare. No one had. Their fleets were too large, their tactics too predictable. They had never been forced to adapt to an enemy like this. And as they tried to regroup, they realized that the human warship wasn't just an opponent, it was a force that was rewriting the rules of battle itself. The Elysians, who had been on the brink of defeat, now saw a glimmer of hope. They had been holding on by a thread, but with the human warship's arrival, they saw a chance to strike back. They cautiously joined the fray, unsure of how the humans would react. But the human ship didn't push them away. Instead, it gave them the space they needed to fight. It was as if the humans were working with them, even though they didn't communicate. The Elysians fought with a newfound strength, taking advantage of the confusion in the Draktar ranks. The Draktar were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. As the warship continued to pick off Draktar vessels, the Elysians grew bolder. They began to launch coordinated attacks with the humans, and slowly, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Draktar were losing ships, their confidence shaken. They could no longer rely on their overwhelming numbers, and their once-feared battle tactics were falling apart. The Draktar commanders screamed orders, but it was too late. Their enemy was unpredictable, and it was winning. In the chaos of battle, something strange began to happen. The human warship didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It didn't make deals or ask questions. It simply fought relentlessly, fearlessly, and with purpose. The Draktar had no idea why the humans had arrived or what they wanted. But as their fleet began to fall apart, they realized one thing: they had underestimated the humans. This war, which had seemed destined to end with their victory, was suddenly slipping away from their grasp. The Elysians, emboldened by the human warship's power, started to reclaim lost territory. They fought with renewed vigor, knowing that the Draktar were no longer invincible. But the real question remained: why had the humans come? What were their motives? They didn't seem interested in taking control of the galaxy. They weren't interested in conquering the Elysians or the Draktar. They were simply fighting. And that was enough to change the course of the war. As the Draktar fleet collapsed under the relentless assault, the human warship made one final strike, crippling the last of their forces. The battle was over, and the Draktar, once certain of their victory, were left in defeat. The Elysians, standing victorious, watched in awe as the human warship turned away, its mission seemingly complete. But as it disappeared into the depths of space, the Elysians were left with more questions than answers. Who were the humans? What had brought them here? And would they return to finish what they had started? The war had ended, but a new chapter was just beginning, one that would forever change the fate of the galaxy. The war on Zorax had been relentless. The Varans, a brutal alien race, had swept across the planet, conquering cities and leaving destruction in their wake. For years, the Zoraxians had fought back, but their resources were running out, their defenses weakening. Hope seemed lost. The Varans, confident that their victory was near, pushed forward with greater force, bringing their most advanced warships to finish the job. The Zoraxians had no choice but to retreat into hiding, waiting for a miracle. And that miracle arrived in the form of a ship unlike anything they had ever seen. In the midst of a fierce assault, a strange, dark warship appeared out of nowhere, moving silently through space. Its sleek, menacing shape was like nothing the Zoraxians had encountered. No one knew where it had come from or who was piloting it. The Varans, dismissing the ship as a small, insignificant threat, focused their attention on the Zoraxian forces, believing that nothing could stop them now. But the human warship, silent and swift, had other plans. Without warning, the mysterious ship opened fire, its weapons lighting up the void of space with incredible force. The Varans, who had thought themselves invincible, were suddenly caught off guard. Their massive warships, built for destruction, were no match for the precision and firepower of the human warship. One by one, the Varan ships began to fall, their shields barely holding as the human ship picked them off with deadly accuracy. The Zoraxians, watching in shock and awe, couldn't believe their eyes. Who were these humans? What did they want? And why were they helping them? The Varans, finally realizing that they had underestimated the power of this strange ship, began to retaliate. They launched everything they had at the human warship: missiles, energy blasts, and waves of fighters, but the human ship dodged them all. It moved with a grace and speed that was almost unnatural, always staying one step ahead. It was as though the ship could predict their every move before they made it. The Varans' frustration grew as their attacks failed to land, and the Zoraxians, still reeling from the shock of this unexpected turn of events, couldn't help but wonder who was this stranger and what was their goal. As the battle raged on, the Varans decided to change their strategy. They began to concentrate all of their firepower on the human warship, hoping to overwhelm it with sheer force. But it was no use. The human ship seemed to shrug off their attacks as if they were nothing, countering with blasts that tore through the Varan ships with deadly precision. It was as if the human ship was playing a game, and the Varans were nothing more than pawns. The Zoraxians, who had been struggling to survive, now found themselves on the receiving end of a new kind of power. They had once been cornered, with their backs against the wall. But now, with the human warship tearing apart the Varan fleet, they were given a chance to strike back. The Zeraxian commander, seeing this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, ordered his forces to join the fight. The Zeraxians, with their remaining ships, launched an all-out assault on the Varons. Together with the human warship, they began to push back the invaders. The tide of battle was turning, but the question on everyone's mind remained, why were the humans helping them? The human warship didn't respond. It didn't communicate, didn't make any demands, and didn't explain its actions. It simply fought. It was clear that the humans had a purpose, but what that purpose was remained a mystery. The Zeraxians, grateful for the unexpected help, still didn't trust the humans completely. They had seen too many alliances forged in the heat of battle, only to be broken once the war was over. Could they trust this stranger who had come to their aid, or was there an agenda they didn't understand? The Varons, now in full retreat, were desperate to end the battle on their terms. They tried one last push, a final offensive that would crush the remaining resistance. But the human warship was already there, waiting. It didn't wait for the Varons to strike first. It took the fight to them, moving faster than anything the Varons had ever seen. The Varon fleet, once so mighty, was now being picked apart, their ships falling one by one. As the battle reached its climax, the Zeraxians began to realize the full extent of the human warship's power. It wasn't just their weapons or their speed, it was their strategy. The human ship seemed to know exactly when and where to strike, always staying one step ahead. It was as if the ship had been designed to anticipate every move of the enemy, turning the tide of battle with surgical precision. The Varons were finished, their fleet destroyed, their forces in disarray. The Zeraxians, now victorious, stood in stunned silence as the human warship continued its relentless assault, wiping out the last of the Varon resistance. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield was silent. The Varons were defeated, their forces scattered, and the Zeraxians had won. But as the human warship slowly turned and began to leave, the question lingered, what did the humans want? Why had they come? And would they return? The Zeraxians had been saved, but they knew one thing for certain. They had no idea who their mysterious saviors truly were. The stranger's gambit had worked. But at what cost? With the war over, the Zeraxians began to rebuild, but they couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The humans had changed the course of the battle, but their true motives remained a mystery. Had they come to stay, or had they merely been passing through? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same again. The war had reached its breaking point. The Khalzar, a formidable alien empire, had pushed the Alliance to the brink of annihilation. For years, they had relentlessly advanced, conquering system after system with their overwhelming firepower and unmatched strategies. The Alliance, once a proud coalition of planets, was crumbling under the weight of the Khalzar invasion. Entire fleets had been wiped out, and the remaining forces were scattered, struggling to hold their ground. On the once thriving world of Tyra, the final stand had begun. The Khalzar had arrived with their flagship, the Nemesis, a massive vessel that could decimate entire cities with a single blast from its main cannon. With it, they had obliterated the last of the Alliance's defense fleets, leaving the Tyra system vulnerable. The Alliance's leaders had long ago accepted the inevitable. There was no help coming, no reinforcements. The Khalzar were too powerful, and their war machine was unstoppable. But just as the last of the Alliance ships were preparing to retreat, something unexpected happened. A new force entered the fray, a single warship, unlike anything anyone had ever seen. At first, it was nothing more than a tiny blip on the Alliance's scanners. The Khalzar didn't notice it either. They were focused on their final victory, preparing to crush Tyra once and for all. But then, the unknown ship fired. A single shot. The Khalzar fleet reeled in surprise, their sensors overwhelmed by the sheer force of the blast. It wasn't just the power of the weapon that shocked them, it was the precision. The blast hit the Nemesis shield, and for the first time in the war, the massive ship faltered. The Khalzar commanders scrambled to identify the source of the attack, but the ship was unlike anything they had seen. It wasn't part of the Alliance, and it wasn't Khalzar technology. The mystery deepened. The unknown warship didn't speak, didn't broadcast any messages. It simply continued its assault, each shot hitting its mark with deadly accuracy. The Khalzar retaliated, launching waves of fighters and missile barrages, but the unknown ship was too fast. It moved through the battlefield with precision, dodging and weaving as if it knew exactly where every Khalzar attack would land. Every missile they launched was countered with a series of evasive maneuvers that left their pursuers frustrated and confused. The Khalzar had never faced anything like this before, and their tactics were failing them for the first time. As the battle raged on, the Alliance forces, still recovering from the initial shock, began to notice the difference. The unknown warship wasn't just a fighter, it was a game changer. The Khalzar had grown used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers and force, but this new ship was turning the tables. The Alliance commanders, hesitant at first, realized that they might have a chance. They began to regroup, rallying their remaining forces and preparing for a counterattack. The Khalzar, meanwhile, were starting to panic. Their nemesis was still powerful, but it was no match for the relentless attacks of the unknown ship. The Khalzar fleet, which had once seemed invincible, was now struggling to maintain control. The unknown ship continued to strike, one shot after another, targeting the weak points in the Khalzar's defenses. Each blow brought them closer to the brink of destruction. The Khalzar commanders, who had never encountered an adversary like this, began to question everything. Who was this mysterious force? And what did they want? The unknown warship continued to make its presence felt, unrelenting in its assault. It wasn't just a force of destruction, it was a force of strategy. The Khalzar fleet was losing its cohesion as their ships were systematically taken down, one by one. The Nemesis fired back with its main cannon, a weapon capable of erasing entire fleets, but the unknown ship evaded it, moving with a speed that defied logic. It wasn't just fast, it was unpredictable. The Khalzar couldn't anticipate its next move, and that uncertainty was their downfall. As the battle reached its climax, the remaining Alliance ships, emboldened by the unexpected support, began to form a united front. Together with the unknown warship, they launched a final assault on the Nemesis and the remaining Khalzar ships. The tide of battle had shifted, and the Khalzar, once so confident in their victory, were now struggling to keep their forces intact. The Alliance pressed forward, and for the first time in years, they could see the possibility of victory. The Khalzar were no longer invincible. In the final moments of the battle, the unknown warship delivered the decisive blow. It targeted the weak point in the Nemesis's defenses, a vulnerability that had gone unnoticed by the Khalzar until it was too late. With a final, devastating strike, the Nemesis exploded in a blinding flash of light. The Khalzar fleet, now leaderless and demoralized, began to scatter, retreating in disarray. The Alliance forces, supported by the mysterious warship, had won. But the victory came with more questions than answers. The unknown warship, its mission complete, began to retreat from the battlefield. The Alliance, now victorious, had no idea who their savior was or what their motives had been. The ship didn't wait for recognition, nor did it make any demands. It simply left, vanishing into the unknown. The Alliance commanders, standing amidst the wreckage of the Khalzar fleet, couldn't help but wonder, was this the end of the war? Or was it just the beginning of something much larger? They had won, yes, but who had they really been fighting for? As the smoke of battle cleared, the Alliance began to rebuild. The Khalzar had been defeated, but there was still so much that remained unanswered. The mysterious warship had changed everything. It had turned the tide of war, but its true intentions remained a mystery. The galaxy, once again, was left in suspense. The war had dragged on for years. The Sketh, a ruthless alien race known for their brutal conquests, had swept through the galaxy, leaving destruction in their wake. Their advanced weapons and vast fleets crushed all resistance in their path, and the once proud human forces had been driven back to their last stronghold, the planet Earth. Desperate and outnumbered, humanity's leaders had long lost hope of winning. The Sketh were unstoppable, and their victory seemed inevitable. As the final battle approached, Earth's defenders were preparing for their last stand. The Sketh fleet had assembled above the planet, ready to wipe out humanity once and for all. Their warships, enormous and powerful, outclassed anything humanity had at their disposal. Every human ship that had been sent into battle had been obliterated. The Sketh's technological superiority was overwhelming. There was no way the humans could win. Or so everyone thought. But just as the Sketh began their final bombardment of Earth's cities, something unexpected happened. A strange new ship appeared in the skies above the planet. It was small, sleek, and dark, unlike anything the Sketh had ever seen. The Sketh commanders dismissed it at first. It wasn't a threat. They had dealt with countless smaller ships before, and this one was no different. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The ship opened fire without warning, and the Sketh fleet was shaken to its core. The weapons it fired were nothing like what humanity had ever used before. With precision and power, the unknown ship struck one of the Sketh warships, tearing through its armor and sending it spiraling into the atmosphere. The Sketh commanders scrambled to react, but they were too slow. The human warship fired again, and another massive ship exploded in a burst of flame. Panic spread through the Sketh ranks as they realized that they were under attack by a force unlike anything they had faced before. The human warship moved with terrifying speed, darting through the skies above Earth as it took down Sketh ship after Sketh ship. Each strike was calculated, each move deliberate. The Sketh fleet, once so confident in their superiority, was now on the defensive. The human ship dodged their incoming attacks with ease, always staying one step ahead. It wasn't just the firepower that stunned the Sketh, it was the precision, the coordination, the sheer skill of the pilots. The Sketh couldn't figure out how this small, mysterious ship was able to turn the tables so quickly. For the first time since the war began, the Sketh commanders started to worry. They were used to fighting wars with brute force and overwhelming numbers, but this new enemy wasn't playing by their rules. The human warship was surgical in its strikes, hitting weak points in the Sketh fleet that they hadn't even known existed. It was as if the human ship knew exactly where to strike before the Sketh even had a chance to react. Their tactics were failing, and the Sketh could not adapt quickly enough to the changing battle. Meanwhile, on the ground, the people of Earth were watching in awe. For years, they had been living in fear, knowing that their days were numbered. But now, for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. The human warship was making a difference. It wasn't just the firepower or the tactics that amazed them, it was the fact that, against all odds, humanity was fighting back. The Sketh were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. The human advantage, whatever it was rewriting the rules of the war. As the battle raged on, the Sketh commanders tried to regain control. They unleashed their most powerful weapons, sending waves of fire toward the human ship, but it was no use. The human ship moved too fast, dodging and weaving through the chaos. The Sketh tried to regroup, focusing all their firepower on the single human ship, but even their most advanced weapons couldn't land a hit. It was clear that the human warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of something much more significant. The Sketh were no longer invincible. Realizing they were losing, the Sketh began to fall back. Their once mighty fleet, which had been so certain of victory, was now in disarray. The human ship continued to pick off Sketh warships, each strike pushing the invaders further away from Earth. The Sketh, desperate to salvage their invasion, decided to make one final push, a last-ditch effort to destroy the human warship and the planet beneath it. But it was too late. The human warship, having broken the back of the Sketh fleet, prepared for its final strike. With one last, devastating attack, it struck the Sketh flagship, sending it tumbling toward the surface of Earth. The explosion that followed was massive, and it sent shockwaves through space. The Sketh fleet, now leaderless and demoralized, scattered. They had no plan, no unity left. The battle was over. As the dust settled, humanity was left in stunned silence.